Welcome to our Bible study on 1 Samuel. Before you watch this video, make sure to go and read chapter 13. We're going to cover a little bit of chapter 14 too, so you might read a few sections into chapter 14, and then you can come back and watch this video. All right, last week we talked about Samuel's retirement speech. This is the prophet's farewell address to Israel, and it contains a lot of warnings, and it's almost like a court case in which God is vindicated and Samuel is vindicated, but we're not so sure about Israel's fate just yet. The jury is not out. Now, from there, we transition to a story about Saul and his downfall from chapters 13 to 15. We see that he reigned as king starting in his 30s and into his 70s. We see a second military engagement in Bethel. We hear that Saul has 2,000 men with him. Jonathan, his son, has 1,000 men with him. And this is addressing a Philistine threat. And Jonathan takes the initiative and attacks a Philistine outpost, and the Philistines come in force. They come with everybody. They have as many chariots as Saul has men. They have double the chariot riders, and they have as many soldiers as Abraham was promised descendants, like the sand on the seashore. So they are outmatched, and they, in response, hide and basically bid for time. They go into caves and cisterns. They go across the river. And it's not exactly clear, is this bad? Is this cowardice? Have they been outsmarted? Were they unprepared? But the bottom line is that they need help. So they call for Samuel. Now, some scholars impute bad motives to Samuel. He doesn't show up on time. He didn't show up in the way that he promised to do. But I actually don't think that. It's just the fact that the prophet is delayed. He doesn't come exactly when Saul wanted him to. Saul's army starts to become very afraid. They fall apart. He's losing numbers, and numbers is what makes an ancient army strong. So he gets together a burnt offering, and he does what only Samuel was supposed to do. And when Samuel arrives, he asks Saul, "What have you done?" Now, in theory, you could say that there's good intentions here. Saul wants to offer a sacrifice to God before the battle. He wants to maybe cleanse the sins of his soldiers, and he wants to go in with God's favor. But the fact of the matter is, this is only the kind of question you ask for someone who has sinned. When God speaks to Eve after she eats of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God says, "What is this you have done?" After Cain kills his brother, God says to Cain, "What have you done?" Samuel is asking a sinning Saul, "What have you done?" Not because he doesn't know, but because he wants him to admit it and say it and confess it. And just like Eve and just like Cain, Saul blames everyone else for his behavior other than himself. He says, "Well, the men were scattering. It's their fault for being cowards. And you didn't come at the set time, Samuel, so it's your fault for being late. And the Philistines, they were assembling, and it's their fault for threatening us and being our enemies. And I thought, I have not sought the Lord's favor, so I'm going to seek the Lord's favor." And so I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering, which was only for Samuel to offer. Now, Samuel comes out and directly condemns the king for his behavior. This is not the last time a prophet will do this. He says, "You have done a foolish thing. You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you." And this story fits to a T what happened in chapter 10. Samuel tells Saul at an unforeseen time, he says, "You can go down to Gilgal without me, but I will come down to you to sacrifice, and you must wait until I come to you and tell you what to do. I will bring you the word of the Lord." And Saul doesn't wait. If he would have waited, Saul says that God would have established his kingdom over Israel for all time, but now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has already sought out a man after his own heart, appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command. And at the end of this speech, Saul's army is a fraction of what it used to be. He had 2,000 men to himself, 1,000 for Jonathan, and now he's left with 600. Now, Saul and his son Jonathan regroup, and they seem to be on the total defense with no real plan. There are 3 Philistine raiding parties that are attacking Israel while the king and his men are by themselves hiding in the ground. I mean, it's almost as if they're already dead and buried. And some of them have crossed the river, meaning they have left the promised land. They have exiled themselves, and on top of it all, they are outgunned. Basically, the last section of chapter 13 says that these are a bunch of farmers with sickles instead of and against men with swords and chariots. The only two guys with swords are Saul and his son Jonathan. Now, Saul is being presented to us as an anti-Gideon. If you go back to the book of Judges and you read chapter 6 and following, you'll see that the Midianites are oppressing Israel and Israelites flee to caves, just like the soldiers are doing right now in chapter 13 of 1 Samuel. Gideon faces long odds, just like Saul is facing long odds. But Saul has 2 times the number of soldiers that Gideon had. And Saul, just like Gideon, blows a trumpet to call Israel to arms. But instead of being like Gideon, Saul cowers away from battle. Instead, he's like Adam. Saul is making a bunch of excuses. And instead of Saul, his son Jonathan is the one who bravely takes initiative against the enemies of Israel. Jonathan goes on a secret mission in the beginning of chapter 14, and he takes his armor bearer. Now, his dad is under a tree with 600 men and some of the family of Eli, which is not a great sign. This is kind of bringing us to with these images of Adam, right, under a tree with bad counsel, right? Jonathan, on the other hand, is between 2 cliffs. And basically what he does is he has to climb down one side of the cliff and then climb up the other. And this is a very vulnerable position to be in. It's like he's climbing into the mouth of death, the pit, Sheol itself, and he'll come out the other side, almost like a death and a resurrection for Jonathan. And the armor bearer is very faithful to him. He says, "Go ahead, I am with you. You have my heart and my soul." And now this section kind of sounds like a gamble. Jonathan says, perhaps the Lord will act. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving us, whether by many or by few. But I think what it's trying to say is that Jonathan is more like Gideon than his dad. He's not gambling with the Lord. He's confident that the Lord can save. And Jonathan predicts that there's going to be 2 different kinds of responses. Either the Philistines will see them and says, "Wait there till we come to you," recognizing them as a real threat, or they'll say, come on up to us. And I think what this is meaning is this is like a taunt. You can come up to us. We're arrogant. We're proud. We have the battle sewn up, and there's no way that you can defeat us. And Jonathan says, if they say in this proud and arrogant way, "Come on up to us," that means we know the Lord has given them into our hands. We know that the Lord humbles the proud. And if they're arrogant, if they think we can't beat them, we're going to teach them a lesson. And that's exactly what Gideon says back in chapter 8. He teaches lessons to others. The Philistines think they're going to teach Jonathan a lesson, but Jonathan teaches them a lesson. He teaches them a lesson to not be arrogant and proud. And so Jonathan and his armor bearer attack them. They're dominant. They win. They're powerful. They're strong. And the Midianites are totally caught off guard. They start attacking each other the Philistines start attacking each other just like the Midianites attacked each other when Gideon surprised them in battle. So what this whole story is demonstrating, I think, is the first fall of Saul. We're seeing that Saul is impatient. He's not waiting for the prophet Samuel to sacrifice. He's defensive. He's not taking responsibility for his actions. And he's cowardly. He's not taking initiative against the Philistine army. He is the anti-Gideon. Meanwhile, his son is a new Gideon. Saul is this fallen Adam figure. And just as we see in the rest of the book of 1 Samuel, as a father begins to fall, there is a son who appears. Eli realizes that his wicked sons are falling from grace, and that's when Samuel shows up. And he becomes a father to 2 sons, but they also fall from grace. We hope that Saul would be a good son, that he would be adopted by Samuel and be faithful to God, but he falls too. So now a new son, more faithful than his father, Jonathan, appears, who we hope will be like Samuel, a faithful leader. And so we're seeing that continuing theme of unfaithful sons and faithful sons, ones who are wicked and go against God, and ones who follow God and do what God wants. This story is about fathers and sons. Here are some questions to consider. Saul's sin is clearly one of impatience. He could have waited for Samuel, and Samuel would have offered the sacrifice. Go back and look at the stories of Adam and Eve, as well as the story of Esau. Can you see any impatience in their sins? Jonathan's plan almost seems like he's forcing God to be on his side during a battle. He says, if my enemies say, come up, then the Lord has given us the battle. Is this a dangerous practice? Is there another way of interpreting his words? Is there anything worthy of imitation in Jonathan's approach? Third, and finally, Saul sins without Samuel's presence, but with the presence of some of Eli's descendants. What does this teach us about the company that we keep? And what should it teach us about the counsel that our own leaders seek? I hope this video is a blessing to you.